My voice didn't shake when I made the call. I think that surprised me more than anything else that night. That after 34 years of marriage, after raising a daughter who laughed loud enough to fill any room she walked into, after building a life I was genuinely proud of, the thing that finally broke something open inside me didn't make me yell or cry or throw anything across the room. It made me go very, very quiet. I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I'm 67 years old. I spent the better part of my career as a family court mediator in Raleigh, North Carolina. I sat across tables from people in the worst moments of their lives: divorces, custody fights, restraining orders, the whole painful mess of what happens when a family falls apart. I thought I knew what abuse looked like. I thought I could spot it from a mile away. I missed it entirely in my own house. That's the part I still haven't fully forgiven myself for. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter because that's all she's ever been to me, the whole center of it, was 29 when she met him. She'd been living in Charlotte, working in pharmaceutical sales, doing well. She called me every Sunday without fail, and those calls were the highlight of my week. My wife Eleanor passed 8 years ago from pancreatic cancer, and after that, it was just the two of us figuring out how to be a family of two. We got pretty good at it. His name was Philip Craw. He was 34, worked in commercial real estate, drove a truck that cost more than my first house. He was the kind of man who smiled at you and made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. The first time my daughter brought him to Thanksgiving, he helped clear the dishes without being asked, complimented my green bean casserole like it was something from a five-star restaurant, and asked me 3 separate questions about my career that showed he'd actually listened when my daughter talked about me. I liked him. I want to be honest about that. I genuinely liked the man. The first year was fine. More than fine. My daughter seemed happy in a way I hadn't seen since before Eleanor got sick. She laughed differently around him. Easier. Like something in her had finally settled. They got engaged in the spring. Small ceremony planned for the following October, and I walked her down the aisle with a full heart. I did not see what was already in motion. The first sign I noticed, and I mean the first one I actually registered as a sign, not just filed away and forgot, was about 8 months after the wedding. My daughter called on a Sunday like always, but something in her voice was off. Not sad exactly. Careful, like she was choosing each word before she said it. I asked if everything was okay. She said yes. Of course, everything's fine. Philip just had a stressful week at work. I accepted that. I shouldn't have, but I did. Over the next several months, the Sunday calls started getting shorter. Then they started coming less regularly, every other week. Then sometimes she'd go 3 weeks without calling. And when I called her, she'd pick up sounding slightly out of breath, like I'd caught her at a bad time. Philip was in the background once, and I heard him say something I couldn't quite make out. And she said, "I have to go, Dad. I'll call you tomorrow." She didn't call the next day. I told myself she was busy. Newlyweds build their own rhythms. I knew better than to crowd her. That's what I told myself, and I was wrong to tell myself that. The second sign was subtler, and it took me longer to name it. When I did see my daughter, holidays, her birthday in July, the occasional weekend when Philip had work trips, she had stopped bringing up things she used to talk about constantly. She used to have opinions about everything: politics, movies, the way her company was restructuring its sales regions, books she was reading. She was opinionated and funny, and a little stubborn, and I loved all of it because she got it from her mother. The opinions stopped, or not stopped, got smaller, hedged. She'd start to say something and then kind of trail off, look toward wherever Philip was in the room, and redirect. I noticed it. I told myself I was reading too much into things. She was just more settled now, more mature. Marriage changes people. That's normal. God, the stories I told myself. The third sign was the one I almost did something about. About 2 years into the marriage, my daughter called me on a Tuesday morning. Not a Sunday, a Tuesday, which was already unusual. And her voice was thick in a way I recognized from when she was a teenager and trying not to cry. She said she'd been thinking about leaving her job, that Philip thought it might be good for her to take some time off, that the travel was getting to her, that maybe she could do something more local when she was ready. She said it like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. I said, "Is that what you want?" There was a pause just long enough that I felt it in my chest. "Philip thinks it's a good idea," she said. I almost said something then. I almost said, "That's not what I asked you." I almost said, "You've been at that company for 4 years and you're good at it, and you don't have to do anything you don't want to do." I almost said, "Are you okay? Really? I need you to tell me the truth." Instead, I said, "Well, whatever you decide, I support you." I have replayed that conversation more times than I can count. She left the job. She was 31 years old with a 6-year sales record and a company car, and she walked away from it, and I let it happen without pushing hard enough to find out why. Philip's mother, a woman I'll call Vera, had been in the picture since before the wedding. She was 65, recently widowed, and she had repositioned herself, that's the only word I can think of for it, repositioned herself into my daughter's marriage like she was a permanent resident. She lived 40 minutes away in Greensboro and came over most weekends. She had opinions about my daughter's cooking, my daughter's housekeeping, my daughter's hair, my daughter's choice of friends, my daughter's relationship with me. The last one was the one I heard about indirectly, in pieces, over time. Vera apparently felt that my daughter spent too much emotional energy on her side of the family, that it created an imbalance, that a wife's first loyalty should be to her husband's household. She said things like this at Sunday dinners, and Philip nodded along, and my daughter sat there and said nothing. I didn't know most of this until much later. My daughter protected me from it. She was trying to manage the whole situation herself, keep everyone from colliding, smooth every surface until nothing looked broken. She was working herself to exhaustion doing it, and I didn't see how tired she had become. The dinner that changed everything happened in February, Philip's birthday. They were hosting at their house in Charlotte, a nice house. A nice house, 4 bedrooms, the kind of house that looks like a life is going well. Vera was there. I drove up from Raleigh, 3-hour round trip, brought a bottle of bourbon Philip had mentioned wanting. My daughter had spent 2 days cooking. The table looked beautiful. We were halfway through dinner when my daughter knocked over her water glass. It wasn't dramatic. Water glasses get knocked over. She reached for the bread basket and her elbow caught the glass and it tipped and water spread across the tablecloth. She was already apologizing before the glass stopped moving, jumping up, grabbing her napkin, saying she was so sorry, she'd get it, it was fine. What happened next took maybe 4 seconds. Philip's hand came across the table. He grabbed her wrist hard enough that she stopped moving. Then he let go, and in the same motion, he slapped her. Once. She froze. Vera, his mother, this 65-year-old woman sitting across from me, made a sound I will never get out of my head for the rest of my life. Not a gasp, not a protest. A short, sharp exhale of satisfaction, like something had been confirmed. Then Philip slapped my daughter again. I was on my feet. I don't remember standing up. I was just suddenly standing, my chair pushed back behind me, and the room felt like it had gone somewhere I didn't recognize. Philip looked at me with an expression I can only describe as unconcerned, like he was waiting to see if I'd do something useful or just stand there. Vera said, "She needs to learn to be more careful." My daughter was not looking at either of us. She was looking at the tablecloth with her hands flat on the table and her jaw set in a way that told me she had been here before, that this was not new, that this was, in whatever terrible calculus she had been living in, something she had learned to absorb without falling apart in front of people. That was the moment. Right there, that expression on my daughter's face, not shock, just endurance, that was the moment I understood how long this had been going on and how completely I had failed to see it. I picked up my phone from the table. Philip said, "Sit down." I didn't sit down. I walked into the hallway. My hands were not shaking. I want to be clear about that. I have thought about it many times since, and my hands were steady. I scrolled to a contact I had saved in my phone for a reason I had never actually articulated to myself. A reason I now understood. A contact I'd added 3 weeks before that dinner after a Sunday call where my daughter's voice had that careful quality again, and I'd gotten off the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time thinking about the things I hadn't let myself think directly. The contact was a detective, former colleague of a man I'd worked with for years in family court, someone who specialized in domestic cases, someone I'd been told was thorough and discreet. His name was in my phone under the name I'd given him when I saved it. Someone who handles things right. I called him. He answered on the second ring. I said, "I need to talk to you tonight." He said, "Tell me what you have." I told him what I had. I told him about the dinner and the slaps and Vera's satisfaction and my daughter's expression that told me this wasn't the first time. I told him I had suspicions going back further. I told him I thought there might be financial control involved. My daughter had mentioned once, offhand, that Philip managed all their accounts now, that it was just easier, that he was better with money. That had bothered me, and I'd let it go like I'd let too many things go. The detective, whose name was Harmon, said he could start making calls. He knew someone at the Charlotte Police Department Domestic Violence Unit. He knew how these cases were built and what was needed to biz them. He asked me if my daughter would cooperate. I said I didn't know yet, but I was going to find out. I went back into the dining room. Philip was eating. Vera was talking about something I didn't catch. My daughter was in the kitchen. I could hear her running water. I sat down and I did not say anything to Philip or to Vera. I sat there and I finished what was on my plate and I watched the clock and I waited. After dinner, I helped clear dishes. My daughter and I were alone in the kitchen for 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because I was counting. I said, "I need you to listen to me carefully. You don't have to say anything right now, but I need you to know that I see what's happening. I see it, and I am not going to pretend I don't." She kept rinsing dishes. Her hands were very still. She said, "Dad." I said, I know, but I need you to hear me say it out loud. What happened tonight at that table, that has happened before. I can see that it has. And you are my daughter, and I am not going to watch this continue." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, "I'm scared." And that was everything. That one sentence was everything. I said, "I know you are. I'm going to handle this in a way that keeps you safe, but I need you to trust me." She nodded. Once. Just once. I drove home to Raleigh that night and I called Harmon again and I told him my daughter was willing. We talked for 90 minutes. He walked me through what would happen next, what documentation existed, what could be obtained, how these cases were typically prosecuted in North Carolina. He had already made one call to his contact in Charlotte. Things were already in motion. What I didn't know yet, what Harmon was in the process of uncovering over the following weeks, was how much there was to find. Philip had been systematically isolating my daughter for 2 years. The job wasn't her choice to leave. He had pressured her into it, first subtly, then not subtly, citing her schedule as the reason he couldn't trust her, the reason she was unavailable, the reason their marriage was suffering. Once she was out of work, he moved all their finances into accounts in his name only. He gave her an allowance, an actual weekly allowance like she was a teenager, deposited into a separate account he could monitor. He reviewed her purchases. He questioned anything he hadn't pre-approved. Vera was not an innocent bystander in any of this. She had been coaching her son for years. Harmon found texts, through a process I won't go into detail about, in which Vera explicitly told Philip how to keep my daughter in line. Her words, when to be firm, what my daughter's weaknesses were, what buttons to push. She had been doing this since before the wedding. My daughter had a therapist she had started seeing secretly 6 months before that dinner. She had been building her own record of things, dates and incidents, written in a notebook she kept in her car, not the house. She had been doing this carefully and quietly on her own because she didn't know yet that she had people in her corner. When she found out what I had set in motion, she cried for a long time, and then she said, "I thought if I told you, it would break you." I told her the only thing that could break me is not knowing. The case moved through the system over several months. The physical assault at the dinner table was documented and charges were filed: assault and battery. Harmon's contact at the Charlotte PD, a detective named Torres, was exactly who Harmon said she was: thorough. She built the financial abuse case alongside the assault case. The text between Philip and Vera was subpoenaed. My daughter's notebook became part of the record. Philip's lawyer tried to argue the dinner incident was a momentary loss of control, isolated, out of character. Torres had 6 other incidents documented from my daughter's notebook, cross-referenced with medical records my daughter hadn't even known were relevant until Torres pointed them out. 2 ER visits over 2 years, both filed as accidents: a sprained wrist and a hairline fracture in her left hand. Not accidents. Vera was charged as well: aiding and abetting, facilitating abuse through documented communication. Her lawyer called it an overreach. The prosecutor called it a paper trail. My daughter moved out the week the charges were filed. She came back to Raleigh, back to the house she grew up in, and she slept in her childhood bedroom for the first time in 8 years. I made her Eleanor's biscuit recipe the first morning, and we sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee, and neither of us tried to make it into something it wasn't. It was hard. She was healing from something that had been accumulating for years, and healing from that kind of thing is not fast or linear, and there were mornings she couldn't get out of bed, and that was okay. That was allowed. The divorce was finalized before the criminal case concluded. She got half of what was rightfully hers, which was less than it should have been because Philip had been restructuring assets for the better part of a year once he realized things were unraveling. But she got enough to start over. She found an apartment in Raleigh close to me. She started seeing a therapist she actually chose for herself. She started running in the mornings. The first Sunday she called me from her own apartment. Her voice sounded different, not careful, not hedged, just like herself. Philip pled guilty to the assault charge and 1 count of financial exploitation of a domestic partner, North Carolina statute, not widely known but very real. He received 18 months probation, mandatory counseling, and a restraining order. His real estate license was suspended pending review of the criminal record. I won't pretend that felt like enough. There were nights I sat in my living room and thought about what 18 months of probation means against 2 years of documented abuse, and the math didn't balance. It still doesn't, completely. Vera was convicted on the aiding and abetting charge, 60 days community service, 2 years probation, and a fine. Again, not enough, but on the record, permanent and on the record. I have been asked since all of this happened whether I felt guilty for not acting sooner. For the Sunday calls, I accepted at face value. For the conversation about the job I didn't push hard enough on. For the 3 years of signs I interpreted charitably when I should have trusted what I was trained to recognize. The honest answer is yes, I carry that. I probably always will. But here's what I know now. Sitting here at 67 in the house Eleanor and I built together, with my daughter 10 minutes away and her voice sounding like her voice again, the guilt is mine to hold. What I do with the time I have left is mine to choose. I spent 34 years helping other families survive the hardest things that can happen to a family. I missed it in my own. That's a fact I can't change. What I can do is say it plainly out loud to anyone who might be sitting where I was sitting 3 years ago, watching someone they love with careful eyes and telling themselves it's probably nothing. It is probably not nothing. Trust what you feel. Make the call. Do it before the dinner table moment, before the water glass, before your daughter learns to look at a tablecloth and endure. Do it now. Do it while there is still time to course correct, while the damage is smaller, while the path back is shorter. Because I can tell you from the other side of it, the silence you think is protecting her is just giving it more room to grow. And the call you're afraid to make is the same call that, when I finally made it, started the chain of things that brought my daughter back to herself. That is the only legacy I care about leaving. Not the case number, not the conviction, not the satisfaction of watching the man who hurt my daughter stand in front of a judge and have his life reordered. Just her. Just her voice on a Sunday morning sounding like the person I raised her to be. That's enough. That's everything. I've been sitting with this for a long time now. And the thing that keeps coming back to me isn't the courtroom or the conviction or the day Philip stood in front of a judge and had his life taken apart piece by piece. What keeps coming back is that Tuesday morning phone call. My daughter's voice, thick and careful, telling me Philip thought it would be good for her to leave her job. The pause after I asked her if that was what she wanted. That pause was the whole story, and I didn't read it. There's a version of cause and effect that's easy to see in hindsight. Philip controlled, isolated, diminished, and eventually what he built collapsed under the weight of its own cruelty. Vera enabled, encouraged, reinforced, and eventually her text became evidence and her name appeared on court documents. The consequences were real and they were proportional, not because the world is tidy, but because when you construct a life around dominating another person, you are building on ground that cannot hold. It gives way, maybe slowly, maybe not until someone finally makes the call you should have made years earlier. But it gives way. What I keep returning to is what it cost my daughter to stay upright through all of it. She kept a notebook in her car. She saw a therapist in secret. She was gathering herself quietly with a kind of clear-eyed determination I didn't even know she possessed, because I had not been paying close enough attention to see how strong she had become in the hardest circumstances. That strength, the kind you build not because life is easy, but because you refuse to let it make you smaller, that is not something anyone gave her. She earned it in rooms I never saw, in moments I was not present for. I am in awe of it. And I think about what it means to actually see the people you love, not see them the way you want them to be, not see them through the comfortable assumption that no news is good news. Really see them. I spent 34 years professionally trained to recognize the signs of what was happening in my own daughter's home, and I looked away because looking directly would have required me to act, and acting would have been hard. And I told myself I was respecting her autonomy when what I was actually doing was protecting myself from a difficult conversation. That is the failure I carry, not dramatically, not with constant self-punishment, but I carry it because it's true, and carrying true things honestly is the only way I know to be a person worth trusting. What I want anyone watching this to take from it is not the outcome. The outcome was as good as these things get, and it still wasn't clean. What I want you to take from it is the Tuesday morning, the careful pause, the thing in someone's voice that you almost named and then let go because naming it would cost you something. Name it. Pay the cost. The people who love you are sometimes holding things they don't know how to hand to you, and the most decent thing you can do is make it easier for them to let go. My daughter called me last Sunday from her apartment. She had been on a morning run. She was out of breath and laughing about something her neighbor's dog had done, and her voice sounded exactly like herself. That is what doing the right thing, even late, even imperfectly, can look like on the other side. That's what I'm holding on to.